think, act, and prosper. You are now tuned into the Money Level Show.
Hey, Doom. Good to have you back.
Daryl, great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yes. So you've been cranking out some pieces. What's new with the Doomberg team?
Just watching the crazy political situation unfold, both in the U.S. and around the world, watching the outbreak of potential wars in the Middle East and the ongoing war in Ukraine and stress in China. It's really just an amazing time, a crazy time. Watching gold hit all-time record highs this morning as you and I are recording. It's pretty amazing times.
Yeah. It's definitely it's definitely a lot of stuff going on. So I do want to channel our focus to domestically as the world stage is anticipating an election, and most people in our space are assuming that Trump is going to win by a landslide and such, and people have their political choice or whatnot. I'm not really for either candidate. I mean, I just think politicians are corrupt. All politicians are corrupt in some shape or form, and yeah. So what do you think? What are the implications if Trump wins?
Well, first of all, I would say the U.S. political situation is extremely precarious. I think you and I have talked about this before. It's difficult to imagine an outcome in November that half the country doesn't believe. And I do think that most people on the sort of finance side of the ledger are leaning conservative, and they suspect that Trump will win. I myself lean conservative, but on a podcast appearance I did with Grant Williams on our show This Week in Doom, very early on after the Biden coup, I guess we could call it, I predicted that Kamala Harris would probably win. The media coverage of her has been quite fawning, and they've kind of tried to shut out Donald Trump as much as they can from the traditional news outlets. Like you, I'm not super political or tied to any candidate. I will say, from an energy perspective, we do have a potentially counterintuitive interpretation of the potential outcomes. It is our view that oil companies make more money during Democratic regimes than they do in Republican regimes, and that many of the people in the oil industry may be conservative, but they should be secretly hoping for a Harris victory, because during Democratic regimes, it becomes harder to drill, and because energy is inelastic, shortages often arise, and energy companies make all their money during shortages. And when Republicans are in office, they tend to open the spigots and make it easier to drill, and nothing crushes oil company and gas company profitability like excess supply. And so politically, many in the energy sector would probably be hoping for a Trump victory. But if they were truly optimizing for their wallets, I think they would be just fine with basically a second Biden administration or continuation of the existing policies.
Yeah. That's pretty interesting, and it makes a lot of sense in terms of especially when we saw Biden going to war with the big oil companies and such, and then he ended up doing a Biden pivot, I guess, at some point, when reality set in. But for a while there, he was going toe to toe with some of the big ones like Chevron and I think Exxon and a few others.
Yeah, and again, this all really comes down to supply and demand, and so the oil and gas sector has a long history of torching shareholder money in pursuit of volume, when everybody in the industry knows and should know that you make all your money on price. And so it's counterintuitive, I know, but in our view, if Trump were to win, it would be, all things being equal, bearish for energy equities. And if the current administration were to continue, I think any friction with the government that impedes supply imposes a discipline on the industry that it is proven over and over again it is incapable of imposing on itself. And so, I think we shall see. Although all bets are off, of course, if there's a disputed election and societal upheaval follows from that. I think we came dangerously close to a very, very precarious situation in Butler, Pennsylvania. There, but by the grace of God, a total societal calamity was avoided. But the fact that we were an inch away from such an event shows you just how unstable the current societal situation is. We try hard not to get too emotional about politics. As energy first analysts, we have to understand politics. We refrain from the team sport gotcha side of it, but instead just try to do an agnostic analysis of what's most likely to occur. There are, of course, certain things happening around the world that kind of scare us, including the attack on free speech, especially in the UK and Germany at the moment. But and that could spread here, depending on who wins. But by and large, I think the consensus view that emerged after the failed assassination attempt on Trump and Biden's clear mental deficiencies when he was still a candidate was that Trump would win in a landslide. I cautioned many of our friends on the right side of our sort of network that I wouldn't be prematurely counting those chickens because there's a lot of hatching to do between here and November.
Yeah, yeah. It seemed like the days are getting longer, for sure, for sure. So there's been a lot of I've been hearing a lot of talk about the stock market under whether the stock market performs well under a Democratic presidency or a Republican presidency. Do you have any view on that and any general view on that?
I happen to believe that we are in the post-political part of the stock market rally. I think, as you know, we don't participate in the stock market, at least not in any meaningful size. We are big believers that gold is the proper medium for savings and that you should invest privately where you can impact the outcome. But to your question about the stock market, I think the U.S. fiscal situation is approaching sort of runaway status where the powers that be begin to lose some control. We're adding $1 trillion in debt every 90 days. The interest payments on the debt are over $1 trillion a year, more than we spend on or waste on the U.S. Department of Defense. And the world is moving away from the dollar and towards a more neutral reserve asset like gold for the settlement of international trade imbalances. And this is why I think we see gold at $2,500 an ounce. And I think, frankly, it's going to come to a point where the stock market is basically a runaway train, a hedge against inflation. It's hard to see how the U.S. squares its fiscal situation with any semblance of reality. We can't keep going on printing and printing and printing and spending and spending and spending indefinitely. At some point, we're going to have a failed treasury auction. Yields are going to spike. The U.S. is behaving like an emerging market economy, and that, but for the privileged position of being the issue of the reserve currency, global reserve currency, the U.S. would already be in a pretty fiscally damning situation. And it's hard to see, it's just hard to see a positive outcome from the spiral that we had. There's nobody in Washington, D.C., for example, talking about fiscal discipline these days. And so what is the stock market price? Like, what does the NASDAQ mean? What does the S&P 500 mean? That's the dollar value of the equity ownership of the companies that make up those lists. And if the dollar value goes down, the nominal price of those stocks go up. And so let's just take gold. Since Nixon removed the US dollar from the gold standard 50 years ago now, 51 years ago or more, the price of the dollar has gone down in gold terms like substantially. And So when I view the price of gold at $2,500 an ounce, I take that to mean that the price of the dollar is 1/2500th of an ounce of gold. It used to be 1/30th of an ounce of gold. And so that tells you that, the Big Mac isn't more expensive in ounces of gold. It's just more expensive in dollars. And I do believe that the world will soon return to gold as the sort of the the true measure of value. But here, let's put it another way. For as long as I've been alive, 20 American Gold Eagles will buy you a very nice appointed car, mid-size SUV, let's say, in today's market. And in 20 years, I believe 20 American Gold Eagles will buy you a nice mid-sized, well-appointed SUV. The purpose of gold is to preserve your purchasing power. And I think a rising stock market and a rising gold price, both measured in dollars, is actually masking the degradation in the value of the dollar.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. And so when we're looking at, actually, I want to go to one of the points that you mentioned about neither party is talking about balancing the budget, reducing deficit spending, or anything like that. And that's been my main issue. It's like, well, one of the main issues is with both parties is that there's no plan to reduce spending, balance the budget. I think we're at the point of no return with the national debt. I have no optimism that it's going to get erased. I mean, I've heard Luke Gromen talk about, if gold was revalued to a certain price, that could potentially happen, and maybe that'll happen someday down the line or something like that. But as of right now, I don't see any light coming through for that to happen. And so when we're looking at, so if we look at, like, let's say Kamala wins, all right, and the current amount of deficit spending that's happening under the Biden presidency, where do you see that? Do you see that on the same trajectory under either candidate, or do you see it's going to be worse under Kamala versus Trump? Like, how are you seeing that?
I think they both have proven that neither is willing to swallow the political penalty of turning off the gravy train, right? I mean, so Trump was a prolific spender during his presidency. We ran massive deficits. It's not like he was courageous enough to speak to the nation about the need to tighten our fiscal belts and how we need to preserve the purchasing power of the dollar for future generations and so on. To go back to something you said, which I think is really important, and I love Luke Gromen, and I read him religiously. I'm a subscriber to his. If anybody's listening, it's Force for the Trees. Luke Gromen, you should Google it. It's great. Comes out every Friday. One of the quietly discussed pathways out of the global debt crisis, because the U.S. is, of course, not alone, is for all of the central banks who own a lot of gold to, quote unquote, revalue the gold. What does that actually mean? It means we're going to devalue fiat currencies. Back to my point. So if we wake up tomorrow and gold is $10,000 an ounce, the U.S. allegedly claims to own an enormous amount of gold, and that would put the U.S. on dollar terms in a pretty good position, but it would also help the Chinese and the Russians and the Europeans and everyone else who owns an enormous amount of gold. But what it really means is that the value of your fiat currency, as measured in gold ounces, would plummet. And that is actually one of the few outcomes that avoid a formal default on debt, which can never be repaid. The soft default on debt, which can never be repaid, has historically, hundreds of times over, been to basically inflate away the debt. And that's what we're going to do one way or the other. When they decided to call money printing quantitative easing, they just rebranded something that has been done forever. Print cash to pay for fiscal spending. directly, indirectly, doesn't really matter. And so we wrap age-old fiscal failures in modern PhD conehead economic, vernacular, and we pretend as though we've invented a new solution to a problem that is literally thousands of years old. When left unchecked, governments will spend themselves into oblivion. Once Nixon removed the US from the gold dollar peg, Washington, D.C. became unchecked. It has nothing but a confidence scheme backing the quote, full faith and credit of the US. Well, that full faith and credit is in nominal terms, not in real terms. And no politician ever has been successful in convincing the public that this very bad tasting medicine needs to go down. It's always easier to kick the football down the road. And we're going to see, regardless of who wins, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, I just think they're all trapped on the same train and none of them have a break.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's totally on point. So with the amount of, I mean, I really like how you frame that in terms of like quantitative easing. It's the printing of money, and then what it's an age old thing where they used to diminish the chip off or the value of like coins and add copper to it from gold and silver back in the Roman Empire days and such. And so like it's the same thing, it's just rebranded and communicated in today's modern financial vernacular, like you said. So I appreciate you saying that, because that really it's something that I think about, but then we're always using these terms and stuff, and it doesn't really sometimes it doesn't click in terms of looking at history, and this is how they've always devalued currencies, and as you mentioned earlier, with the value of gold. Where gold is, the price of gold. I mean, you see the price of gold is going up, and the value of the dollar is going down, which is an effect of the money printing, the deficit spending, and the financing of the deficit spending. So I appreciate you saying that. So what is your outlook on gold moving forward? So we're currently at 2,500. I mean, we're in uncharted territories. Like it's hard to. I mean, I look at technical analysis, and you put gold on the chart. It hasn't never been at these prices measured in dollars. Obviously, it's hard to predict a specific price. But do you see gold just being on the same trajectory? Are there any risks of a pullback or anything like that? And like, what's kind of your view on gold in the near term?
So I should disclose that I personally own an uncomfortable amount of gold. It's the most amount of gold measured in either ounces or dollars that I've ever owned in my life. And I would like it if gold went down. Because even though I own an uncomfortable amount of gold, it is still a modest part of the totality of my net worth. And if I wake up tomorrow and gold is at $10,000 an ounce, I will be more protected from the economic upheaval that would have caused that than the average person, but that doesn't mean that I'm better off. I might be better off relative to my neighbors, but I'm not going to be better off in absolute terms. Gold is the only asset that I own that when I wake up in the morning and it's mooning, it makes me uncomfortable. I don't own gold for it to go up in dollar terms. I own gold so that if it does go up in dollar terms, at least I've preserved some aspect of my purchasing power. In other words, I view the gold that I own and the acres of land that I owned and the collectibles that I own as putting a floor under my personal net worth, not as a vehicle for speculation to get outsized gains relative to what may be on offer in the equity markets, for example. And so my view on gold is I hope it goes down, which might sound weird, but since I own so much of it, you would think I would want the quote unquote price of it to go up. But I own gold as a hedge against fiscal collapse. And I don't want to wake up to fiscal collapse. I would like to wake up to a country that is prosperous, that is growing its way out of its debts, that is doing enough for all members of society while still having a mostly free market with strong contract enforcement, good property rights, and freedom of speech for all. We're not anywhere near ideal across any of those variables, and I think you're seeing gold react to that. And I think as we head into the upcoming U.S. election, the societal upheaval is what worries me most, like way, way high up on my personal leaderboard of concerns than the price of gold or the price of oil or the price of natural gas or the price of Nvidia or the price of Tesla or the price of Bitcoin. These things are numbers on a screen. I would like for the society to be far more unified and far more prosperous than we are today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, gold is insurance. That's how I view it as well. Hedge against chaos and uncertainty and devaluation of our currencies. And so, thank you for sharing that. It's with cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. This is it's been interesting seeing this come onto the main political stage. I mean, we had Donald Trump speak at a Bitcoin conference. We have Kamala Harris and her team allegedly talking to Mark Cuban about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, and I think there's like a super PAC waiting to be waiting to go out to support either candidate, and that's like in 200 million or something like that. So cryptocurrency has risen to like the main stage. I mean, I think Russia passed something to where they may start mining Bitcoin or whatnot. What's your take on cryptocurrency these days? I know we've discussed it a while ago. Do you still hold the same view? Has it changed any, or what's your take on that?
So I personally don't own any Bitcoin, and I have never owned any Bitcoin because it has no real purpose in my personal portfolio. Now, people who are sort of Bitcoin enthusiasts would oddly get angry at me saying that. I understand why people who want to own Bitcoin own it, and I understand their reasons for doing so, and I hope it goes to 1 million for them. I have lots of friends who own Bitcoin, but of course, if it goes to 1 million, that's just another way of saying that gold will be at 20,000 if Bitcoin's at 1 million. I think they both have become ways to express fears of fiat currency debasement. And I should say the word debasement comes from the shaving of the coins and the mixing in of the cheap base metals into the money coinage of centuries gone by. But the difference between gold and Bitcoin is that Bitcoin is just undeniably far more volatile. So the 30, 90, 120-day volatility chart of Bitcoin is 3-4 times that of gold. And so, and many people treat Bitcoin as a vehicle for speculation, much more so than I think the gold market is viewed as. And so, were I in my youth, perhaps I would have a different view if I had a much longer time horizon than I do now. I am a risk-averse earner, business builder who takes excess profits and parks them in things that I know will always have value: land, collectibles, and gold. And I don't know that Bitcoin will always have value. But I understand there's a whole army of people who believe, because of the way Bitcoin is structured with the inherent scarcity embedded into it, that it is inevitable that that number go up. I wouldn't begrudge any of my friends who own Bitcoin if number went up for them. And the aspects of the Bitcoin culture where people who are the no coiners are sort of attacked has always been one that has puzzled me. I would never conceive of attacking somebody for however they choose to allocate their own personal portfolios. It just seems a little bizarre. So happy if number goes up. Understand why people own it. Personally, not for me. And that's basically the same view that I've had every time we've spoken, I bet.
For sure. And I did want to touch on silver. So silver, obviously, you got gold at all-time highs measured in dollars, and then silver still lagging behind quite a bit. I mean, we've had to move up and still lagging behind, but there's a lot of silver stackers, still silver bugs. I still buy some silver, but do you have any conviction on silver?
Other than a couple hundred silver eagles sitting in a safe somewhere, I don't really have a large allocation to silver. Silver's kind of interesting because it used to be far more a money metal than it is today. But at the same time, the industrial demand for silver continues to grow. And so it's at this weird transition phase where as solar rolls out globally, industrial demand for silver continues to actually outpace new supply coming online. And so you would think that the bullish setup for silver is looking pretty good right now. But then again, if your base case for owning silver is that it is going to be in high demand industrially, then you have pivoted from a savings vehicle to a speculation vehicle. And gold doesn't really have much in the way of industrial applications, and it has preserved the relative purity of its moneyness. And so the push and take in silver is different than gold, which is as it becomes less of a money metal and more of an industrial metal, it gets closer to sort of the copper treatment, where nuances in the solar market are going to drive price, supply, demand dynamics more so than fears of monetary collapse or a desire to hedge against them. And so for that reason, we prefer to just stick with what we know, which is the pet rock that everybody loves so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So appreciate you for coming on and everything. Anything else you want to share with the audience before we wrap up?
Well, I mean, I hope we didn't come off too doomy, to pardon the pun, but it's a pretty dangerous time, and I think everybody listening needs to ponder how they're positioned, what their risk tolerance is, and how they want to allocate their savings for the bumpy road ahead. Let's hope, and I know you share this view, that we get through this election peacefully, regardless of who wins, that we have a relatively docile transfer of power, and that both sides can agree to disagree politely and set about the business of doing what's right for the country, which seems lost in all of the team sports, our team, your team dynamics. So Daryl, it's always great to talk to you. Anybody listening that wants to find more of our work can go to Doomberg.com. We recently bought that domain name from a squatter, and so now everything that we do can be found directly at Doomberg.com. Daryl, it's great to talk to you. Always enjoy coming on your show, and looking forward to the next time.
Yes. Thank you. Doomberg for president. Everyone, appreciate you coming on, and I know that you would make some policies that make sense. So appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Daryl. Have a great weekend.
All right, you too.